Hello everyone, and welcome back to Spoilers Ahead with Anthony Post, where we're going to be for the first time diving into some spoilers here as I give you my spoiler review for The Batman. If you haven't already, make sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Again, your last chance. If you have not seen The Batman yet, do not go beyond this point unless you like spoilers. If you do, welcome aboard. So I've seen the film 3 times now, and I think with each additional viewing, I come to respect more of what Reeves's ambition and scope is with this film. The ideas that he's presenting here are just really interesting. I went with a friend to see it this past viewing, and we were able to have this really interesting conversation about the world as it is and the systems that are in place. And the fact that a superhero movie can prompt those type of discussions, I think speaks of the really exciting things that Reeves is doing here with his interpretation of the Batman world. Now, from the first scene, he already showed an incredible amount of craft, because knowing the whole movie and going back and seeing that first scene, the whole movie's there. It starts with this opening shot where we are in the point of view of somebody who's using binoculars. And on the first viewing, I thought this was Batman, but I actually find out that it's the Riddler. But I really love this opening scene because it really, again, lays out everything that the movie represents. It is a character, the Riddler, who is on the outside looking in to a young boy dressing up in a costume who is protected by wealth and security of his family. That is Batman. That is the movie. And I think that by using the Ave Maria, which is used prevalently throughout the entire film, it shows you the institutions that many people that are the downtrodden have to keep looking up at, because they're the people with power. They're the people that have the power to force their stories down their throats. The interrogation scene, Paul Dano's performance, which was electric here, really made that scene work. He says, why do we care more about Bruce Wayne than all of the other orphans, the orphans that die in the orphanages? It's because the Waynes have the power to tell their story. And that's essentially what the Riddler's doing. He's telling the stories that Gotham has been afraid to tell or didn't want to tell. And I don't think the movie, it doesn't end up becoming pro-Riddler. He, of course, is a terrorist. But I think the movie shows that our society is not black and white. It's a gradient. There's ambiguity to every facet of our modern day society and past society. And the Riddler is just exposing the truths that we don't want to admit. And the Riddler, of course, with the final act, with all of his followers donning the same costume, shows that in the end, what ends up happening is that the people who instigate these actions end up representing an idea more than a single entity. And how do you kill an idea? Also, I'm interested to know if anybody agrees or disagrees, but I definitely think he knew that Bruce Wayne was Batman and was just toying with him. Now, another thing that I really loved is in Paul Dano's monologue, in the interrogation scene, the Riddler mentions why he's had a fixation on Batman. And he tells him that you inspire through fear. You're able to do these things through fear. And you inspired me to do the same thing. And you can see that Bruce is terrified that what he decided to do, his ideology as Batman, was twisted and used by somebody like the Riddler. But I think that shows the issues when systems are interpreted and represented in ways that maybe that wasn't their intention, but that's the reality of that system. And Batman is a representative for that. I talked about in my non-spoiler review how I felt that the movie, I think, has a real strength to it, that it doesn't let Batman off scot-free because the Batman itself is an institution. So the movie shows how the system is broken, but there's hope that we can strive to fix what needs to be fixed. And that's what the Batman and Bruce are striving for in the third act, once they realize the error of their ways, the same way that the whole movie has been exposing the error of Gotham's ways. He realizes that he can't be somebody who's defined by fear. He can't instill fear in those people that he wants to protect because he's being contradictory. And so the movie kind of matures and kind of redefines Batman, because by the end of the movie, he kind of represents Gotham's hope. He represents the goal that they are striving for. Batman holds up a light for the people of Gotham to follow out of the rubble. And you see Bella Real holding onto the scaffolding because she knows that you can rebuild, that Gotham is not a forsaken junkyard. But the fact that he goes for Mitchell's son, he goes for the young boy, and then Bella Real follows and he leads everybody out through light. Again, it goes back to that conversation about how Batman is a different character, and he really goes on a really moving arc because the Riddler makes him realize the error in his ways and why leading through fear is not any way to lead. The fact that you take Batman, who has always been defined by fear, and like Superman has always been defined by hope, the fact that you've made Batman now a representative for hope, and you see that visually with the bat signal at the end of the film being lit during when the sky is still light out. You know, that we've seen a transition here. It's not only lit during darkness, during the night. It's now lit, during the afternoon when the sun is still out. That shows that the idea of the Batman has changed by the end of the film. It's a really risky choice, I feel, because again, you're kind of redefining one of the core characteristics of the character. But again, it works in the screenplay, it works in the script, it makes sense. And I do think, listen, he's still the Batman. I think this is probably the most authentic Batman that we've seen on screen. So it made sense, but I really appreciate Reeves's just risk-taking and the chances he took in really, again, confronting the history of Batman, both in the comics and cinematically, and making the character change when confronted with the blemishes on his record. And the way that, he used shadows to inflict fear. We see that the first time the Riddler is shown, that he uses shadows to hide and to use them for leverage and his advantage. So the way that the Riddler and Batman, their dynamic in the film is really well done, because it really shows how the Riddler changes Batman and molds him into the person that he is by the end of the movie. It makes him challenge himself and, again, change himself into the person that he becomes. Let's talk about the Joker. Barry Keoghan. I did hear this rumor going in, so I kind of had an idea. I figured this was going to happen. But it was a really well done scene. And I think the look that they've given Barry Keoghan is very different. It embraces the comics and the zaniness, and I think the more artistic quality of the comics, while still being very grounded. And I really like that. I think that's what makes this film very distinctive amid all of the other superhero movies and all the other Batman interpretations. And I also think it'll give this Joker his own flair that's different from all the other iconic performances. I do admit, though, I was like, do we really need the Joker this soon? Like, I would prefer to go into some of these other Batman characters, like the Riddler, like that we haven't been, overexposed with. But listen, I trust Reeves so much after this movie that if he has a great idea for the Joker, and Barry Keoghan, of course, is a wonderful actor, have at it, I would be there. Now, Zoe Kravitz is really great here in the film. She is able to be, I think, confident while also having a vulnerability to her. And seeing the dynamic between her and Bruce is really interesting, because she's a character who's defined by her personal connections, whether it be with her mother, Maria, which, using the Ave Maria, I realize her mother's name is Maria, and Maria also sounds a little bit like Martha, so it could be a reference to that. But she's defined by her personal connections, be it to her mother, to Falcone, who ends up being her father, which that was a really cool development, and then also Annika. And it was a nice touch. I do like how Kravitz plays those scenes, and that her character is bisexual, and the implication is that they're in a romance together. I thought that was a lot of this movie doesn't hit you over the head with its thematic elements, and I like that. It lets the audience come to their own conclusions, and it trusts the audience as much as the movie is advocating for trusting your fellow people. But it shows the differences between her and Bruce, where Bruce is saying, like, stay on the DA during that scene, and she chases after that female assistant because she's like, she knows about Annika, and that's what matters here. And I think that leads us into a really interesting conversation about Bruce Wayne. I loved what they did with Bruce Wayne here. And I think a lot of people who may feel like, oh, Bruce Wayne wasn't really in the movie, he got short shrift, that's not the Bruce Wayne we're used to. And I'm like, I think that's the point. Bruce Wayne in this film has been in a state of arrested development since his parents died. He's essentially a 10-year-old. One of the friends I went to see the movie referenced that his costumes, when he is Bruce Wayne, don't necessarily fit him. They're oversized because he essentially is a kid in his father's clothing. And he's trying to fill the void in ways that he doesn't know how. He's afraid of being a Wayne. He's afraid of attachment, which we see when he's afraid to put on the cufflinks. He's afraid to attach himself to the Wayne legacy. I think the end of the movie, when he and Catwoman are riding off together and they're riding their motorcycles through the cemetery, it's a really sweet scene, I feel, and very moving because there's an innocence to that. They're like two kids who are racing each other on their bikes. And yeah, there's sad stuff. I mean, they're surrounded by a cemetery. They're surrounded by death and loss. And these characters are defined by their death and their loss with their parents passing. But they don't let that stop them from moving on, from acknowledging that it's a part of them, and then they just have to keep going. It was a really touching moment, especially when he's looking in the rearview mirror as Selina goes over the hill, because for the first time, Bruce Wayne is not afraid of attachment. He's not afraid of connection. That's why the scene when he puts in the epinephrine and he goes crazy, and the sound design in this movie is so good. I saw it in Dolby tonight, and I saw it in Cinemark XD the night before. Sound design is so good, man. When he yells and you hear the echoes, it's just so brilliant. But I think the reason why he gets so impassioned, because he realizes that Selina's the first person that he feels he wants to protect. He's wanted to instill fear in Gotham, and he feels that will keep Gotham safe. But I think there's a difference between safe and protect. And I think protection has more emotions tied to it. And this was a case where he needed to protect Selina. And I really like that. And I think Selina then finally has somebody who is wanting to protect her. The whole thing where he tells her, don't shoot him. He's taken enough of you. Don't give him this. When she's pointing the gun at Falcone. And the way that their dynamic works really well, where, yeah, they're going their separate ways by the end of the movie. And that hopeful trust in another person is something they both needed, and why I think the fact that that's the last note that the movie ends on, it's a really touching scene. Another thing that I really thought was an interesting choice was, because the movie is Batman Year 2, a lot of the development and a lot of these characters are already existing. We don't necessarily get introduced to them. It's similar to Spider-Man Homecoming. And a big relationship that is like that here is Alfred. And Andy Serkis, I think, is a very different Alfred. He's a lot colder, but I think he's colder because he's responding to the distance that Bruce has towards him. Bruce sees Alfred as a constant reminder of what he doesn't have, and so he is distant. And when he thinks he's lost Alfred, does he realize the value that Alfred had on him? And the scene in the hospital where he starts lamenting about all the lies that he was told and what happened to his parents, and Alfred reminds him of the light of the fact that his father was a good man, that his parents did care about him, and that he tried. I know Yoda says do or do not, there is no try, but I think there is a lot of merit to trying, because the fact that you are trying to do something good, even if the end result doesn't happen, I think it mirrors the old adage that it's about the journey, not the destination. And I think that's what Bruce needs in that scene, because Bruce needs to know that people can still have good intentions even if life doesn't pan out the way that's intended. And so I really like what they did with Alfred, and I'm really interested, now that I think that the two of them are now more on the same wavelength, what that means for the future of this franchise and this story. I love the use of the mayor's son here, and how that's used to mirror Bruce and his insecurities about his father and his mother's passing. But I love the moment when Alfred sees through the contact lens camera from when Bruce goes to see Mitchell's dead body, and of course he sees the kid. I love that Alfred sees that, and that's why he starts to help Bruce on this mission. Just the idea that he's reminded of the young boy that was thrusted into his life looking for answers, looking for help and assistance, and looking for a family. And, even though he just had a little, anger with Bruce, and Bruce, I think, calls him out and says, "You're not my father," and he goes, "I'm well aware." He sees that young boy, and he's reminded of the young boy that Bruce was, and that's why he decides to help. There's a lot of small details that fill in the gaps and fill in the voids. Small sentences fill paragraphs in this movie. I could talk about this movie forever. I just think it was a really wonderful film that, again, on every further viewing, it just further cements that this is one of the best blockbusters I think ever made. Definitely in recent memory, and definitely one of the best superhero movies ever made. I think it probably is in my top 5, along with the likes of Spider-Man 2, The Dark Knight, Avengers Endgame. So it's in that collection, I feel. It's a really well-crafted, moving picture that I really responded to, and I hope others did too. Comment below, let me know what you thought of the film. If you're watching this video, I'm hoping you've seen the movie. If not, how was it? Did you follow this video all right? So thank you all for checking this out. Make sure to hit subscribe once more so you don't miss any new videos. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you at the movies.